Kia ora tātou. No mai, hara mai, welcome to the Aotearoa Liberation League livestream, episode 2. Kei te take o puhanga toho rā tātou, no mai, hara mai ki tō māua whare. We're very pleased to bring you this livestream. Normally we'd be going on Friday 6 p.m, but because of how busy everything was this week with Waitangi, we were just so exhausted we had to give ourselves just a little bit of extra time to prepare everything. We'd normally like to go over all of the headlines of all of the media, but it's just not realistic. So we're just doing 2 stories today, talking about the culture of abuse in the ACT Party, and of course giving our reflections on Waitangi. So we don't want to go for too long, so we're going to get straight into it. What do you think, Samah? You ready?
Yeah, ka pai, let's get into it. So yeah, we started researching about this Tim Jago story and found so much stuff on the history of ACT enabling abuse, toxicity, and mistreatment of women that we just had to dedicate a really large section to this. So let's start off talking about Tim Jago's abuse. And we're just going to cover this part really quickly, but I think that this aspect of the story in itself highlights the way that power coalesces around abusers, the way that they're protected among various circles, and the way that sexism and racism interact. So we're going to start the story with the fact that in 1999, the second person that we know for a fact Tim Jago abused actually did make a complaint to the police. They and their family bravely went to the police. They tried to stop this man from ever doing it again. And the detective, Rick Veacock, said that he had conducted a full-on investigation 25 years ago, including taking a formal statement from Brian, the victim of Jago's abuse. So quoting the Stuff article now, this was written by Edward Gay, one of the only people who have done a proper investigative piece on Tim Jago's abuse. So thank you. He writes that the detective reading from his handwritten notes at the time, he told the jury that Jago admitted to sharing his bed with Brian on the night in question. Asked what kind of state he was in, Veacock said Jago responded, drunk, but not too drunk to not know what I was doing. Asked what state Brian, the victim, was in, Jago said paralytic. But he denied touching him and said that he didn't know why the teenager made up the allegation. So Jago admits to the detective that he did actually share a bed with a paralytically drunk teenager. The teenager told the detective he was abused, but Jago said he didn't abuse him, and they dropped the investigation. Nothing went forward past that point. And the question is why? And so this Stuff writer contacted a former senior police officer who looked at the file while investigating an unrelated matter. And this police officer, speaking on condition of anonymity, he said that while he didn't read the file from cover to cover, he saw enough to make him question why Jago wasn't charged back then in 1999. He said for a case like this, you'd look at the circumstances, time, place, opportunity, which is all you had, and it would have been a slam dunk, an easy decision to charge. So the question is, and the family of that teenager that was abused back then are asking, is why he wasn't charged back then. And here's a relevant little fact. Tim Jago's brother is a really high-ranking detective inspector. His name is Jeff Jago. He's a veteran cop with more than 40 years of experience. This cop is also responsible for planting cameras in the Urewera Ranges in 2006 and 2007 as part of a covert police investigation. This is Tim Jago's brother. He was involved in this investigation that tried to criminalize some of our best, brightest activists and advocates like Tami Iti during the Urewera raids. And today, he runs an anti-terrorism unit. So it shows that he's still on that same path of trying to pin resistors, activators, anyone that the country likely wants to demonize as a terrorist. That's what I think their anti-terrorism tasks are mostly for anyway. So that's his brother. The police said, of course, this detective had nothing to do with the investigation. So we'll note that. But Jeff Jago isn't the only guy that is related to the police and related to Tim Jago. His wife, Jeff Jago, is a superintendent. Her name's Sue Schwalger. she's also been in the police for a really long time. So Tim Jago has two individuals in really close relation that are high-ranking police officers. So this is a really important context to add, because although they might not have been involved in the investigation directly, it is a very valid question to say, did they have influence on bearing this case and preventing him from being charged back then in 1999? Now, I'm not going to go into the extremely long and troubling history of Tim Jago. For example, he went to Pakistan to offer lessons for children for surf lifesaving. Extremely vulnerable people that he was put in a position of power in another country. We will likely never know if he abused people there. Another example, as you can see, he had all of these charities with almost no real footprint anywhere. It's likely there was a lot of financial corruption going on, as well, as will come out later on in our story. For more of that stuff, I suggest checking out Smith Case Stead on X to see more about Jago. But for us today, we want to focus mostly on the ACT Party and the way that they have enabled a culture of abuse and harassment within both young ACT and potentially in the ACT Party, as well as enabling Jago. So we're going to start the story in 2017 when David Seymour sends Snapchat followers ACT-branded condoms. So at this time, it was really common knowledge that David Seymour was Snapchatting teenagers. It was a strange thing that parents started eventually calling out and were like, hey, we're not really comfortable with this grown man Snapchatting our children. So that was a thing. We'll just note that.
And I'll just say, they might pull us up for calling it an ACT-branded condom. It's a sticker. There's an ACT sticker, just so they don't pull us up on this. But, of course, still the same type of message was sent.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was reading a headline for that one. But yes, they sent a picture of a condom to young people on Snapchat. That's unacceptable. And because we know that his followers had a lot of young people. So this rape culture-y problematic behavior continues. In 2018, when Chris Bishop was called out for Snapchatting teenagers, unsurprisingly, David Seymour spoke up for him and said that it was man-bashing to criticize Bishop for speaking to teenagers on Snapchat. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background. 2019, Tim Jago becomes the president of ACT. During this time, in 2019, we know now that ACT had a festering, extremely toxic culture within their young ACT group. So the Young ACT group is an affiliated group that's allowed to use the logo of the ACT Party. And as you see, they have a very strong relationship with ACT. And we'll just start with this one example because I think it paints a really good image of the kind of behavior that was going on there. A 27-year-old man was making Islamophobic comments to the official Young ACT meme page called David Seymour's Memes for Overtaxed Liberal Teens. And he was saying things like Islam made people dangerous and evil. He also made comments, and now I'm quoting the article, he also made comments that supported far-right ideology in private chats. While these groups weren't officially affiliated with Young ACT, prominent Young ACT members were present in these groups and were aware of his general online behavior. In one group, this 27-year-old man posted a popular far-right meme depicting a Jewish person as a spider, inciting a protest for Black Lives Matter, feminism, and LGBTQ rights. The protesters are drawn as racialized caricatures in front of the crowd. A medieval crusader and a Viking meant to represent white civilization prepare to attack the protests. Join me, brothers, the man wrote. In another post, he indicated he thought Jews might orchestrate his death. And I just want to add here that despite this being a really good article by a couple of good writers, it's strange to me that they didn't refer to this man's behavior on the Young ACT page as being anti-Semitic and white supremacist. In any other scenario, they would clearly call out someone who's accusing Jewish people directly of doing these things of being anti-Semitic. I believe it's because they don't want to associate the ACT Party with anti-Semitism because they often pretend to be on the side of Jewish people through their association with Zionism. Of course, we know that the two are in fact opposed,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the image that they're trying to put out. So they don't want to call them anti-Semitic, but clearly they had an anti-Semitism issue within Young Act. Carrying on, eventually this guy gets banned because he made an Islamophobic comment after the Christchurch terrorism attack against our Muslim brothers and sisters. So after that made a few people uncomfortable. They still didn't outright ban him. They conducted a poll and the people decided to ban him from the group. But it did anger a whole bunch of people in that group. There was an uproar over free speech. They were saying, hey, we have free speech. We can say whatever they want. And that was why this culture of toxicity was enabled in that group. But at the time, ACT Party David Seymour, who was an active member of the online group, intervened and supported the decision of the group's administrators. So David Seymour steps in and says, no, it's good that he was banned. So he was aware of this guy's behavior, right? But regardless of all of this man that we've just talked about, an extremist, was re-added to the group in July 2019. And the article continues. After rejoining the group, he became a prolific poster of sexually explicit and potentially harmful comments on the Young Act affiliated pages. These comments were largely targeted at young women in the group, including Young Act former president Ali Gammeter. When Gammeter and others called it out, the sexual harassment began, she said. And so this is interesting as well, because it's clear that this man and others around him used sexual harassment in order to uphold the white supremacist extremist rhetoric on the Young Act page. So in September 2019, remember Seymour knows about this guy's extremist behavior. This man posted a picture with himself and David Seymour, and David Seymour comments under it saying, oh wow, I didn't realize you were that man's name. So he has no issues being in a picture with this man. He's been fully reintegrated into Young Act despite all the horrific behavior that he's done and despite the fact that he was now sexually abusing people online. So, of course, just as a side note, during this time, he was also going on about Labour being soft on crime on sexual offenders. And, you know, I say this all the time, but all of the ACT Party's narratives are pure projection. He's projecting here. They know they're harboring sexual abusers. That's my opinion anyway. And they know they have a terrible culture within their party, even if they don't know about Jago. So he's projecting there. And I think that's their whole tough on crime thing is it's pure projection because they protect the biggest criminals in this country, the ones who steal the wealth and the health of our environment. So continuing, in 2020, the ACT Party president resigns as the chief executive of the Lifesavers Foundation charity after an investigation into financial mismanagement. Lifesavers Foundation hadn't filed financial statements in 3 years. Okay? But Tim Jago, despite this criminality, remains the president of the ACT Party. May 4th, 2020. This is, as far as we know, the first time that David Seymour and Young ACT President Felix Poole were officially made aware of sex abuse allegations of a man affiliated with Young ACT. And Felix Poole himself, he admitted that he did learn about these allegations on May 4th. And as you can see in the article, David Seymour also knew about those sexual assault allegations. So this was on May 4th. On May 6th, 2 days later, Ali Gammeter, whom we mentioned earlier, resigns publicly, complaining that she was ignored for months. To read from the article, Gammeter said members of Young ACT and their associates had been sexually harassing her and other female members of the youth wing online and in person for months. There wasn't many women in the ACT group, she said, but the majority of them had experienced some form of sexual harassment from other members. Gammeter said she removed people from the group who were sexually harassing her and others. But Young ACT President Felix Poole objected to her removal of those members, and he re-added those people to the group. And she resigned later that evening. But it gets worse. Not only did they re-add these abusers into the group, but Felix Poole asked Gammeter, and this is Felix Poole's statement to RNZ, him admitting this. He asked Gammeter to create a sexual harassment and bullying policy after she complained about being sexually harassed by members of the group early in the year. So she goes to the young ACT execs and she tells them, hey, I'm being sexually harassed and abused and I have these serious allegations. And they tell her, oh, well, we don't really have a harassment policy, so you have to come up with it if you want these people dealt with. I mean, it's hard to think of a better example of a group enabling abuse and harassment and of creating barriers for a person reaching justice. As Ali Gammeter says herself, it was like telling me I had to jump through hoops to save myself from the people that were harming me. This is from another article. Now, the spin-off also wrote about this. They also saw some screenshots for themselves, and they give another horrific example of abuse that Ali Gammeter experienced. They say that a private event was created on Facebook with the purpose of getting Gammeter intoxicated so that she would go home with the same commenter. The commenter is understood to now be associated with the New Conservatives. So that's extremely serious. They're forming a Facebook group in order to try and intoxicate someone and potentially abuse or rape them. That is extremely serious, and these are the type of people that they allow to remain in Young ACT. And the fact that he's with New Conservatives now is again to the fact that racism and sexism are deeply related ideologies of domination. So Newsroom, again, also has saw examples for themselves. They said that the messages are sexually explicit and are not appropriate for publication. That's how bad they were. They include jokes about sexual assault, including rape and sexual harassment. The main memes page, they also add this, that the main memes page, which was run by the Young ACT executive, has since been removed from Facebook, but other groups, such as David Seymour Memes 2 Unarchived Boogaloo, have sprung in its place. Now, I mention this because now we've seen two names of Young ACT affiliated groups, and both of them have David Seymour in their name. I find that interesting because what it tells me is that these young people, they're idolizing David Seymour specifically, not just the ACT Party, but they see something in David Seymour specifically that makes them feel emboldened in their toxic behavior. And I believe it's his constant show of a lack of empathy, his constant show of disregard for other people's feelings and well-being. And they vibe off that, and they feel empowered off that, and they form groups around that, and then they create a festering toxic culture of abuse and harassment within that. And so all of this to say that I think David Seymour is a bit of a cult figure among some toxic males in this country. And in that same article, there's another really interesting thing that I think points to something even worse, that I think it points to the fact that David Seymour actually shows concerning signs of grooming children. So in that in that article, it says that Gammeter was approached by Seymour to become involved with the ACT Party after her participation in last year's youth parliament in 2019. So in 2019, she made a speech in parliament as a youth MP for National's Harete Hipango. It was a speech about freedom of speech. David Seymour liked it, and he approached her afterwards to ask her to get involved with Young ACT. That in itself is creepy, okay? And then after that, he posted her video on his Facebook, which in her words, blew it up. So here he's approaching an impressionable young woman, a teenager. He's complimenting her. He's posting her stuff online. By January 2020, she becomes the vice president of ACT. And then she gets horrifically sexually harassed and abused. And one more example of his involvement with these Young ACT people is this post that he made at the last year's Pride Parade. And in one of those pictures, we can see that, and so in 2020 Pride Parade, we can see that he posted a picture with what was then Ali Gammeter, the vice president of Young ACT. And sadly, we know from an RNZ article that, in fact, she was actually abused physically at this rainbow parade. So I just think there's a really strange and concerning relationship between David Seymour and children, and him actually directly approaching them, and then him posting them and trying to give them some sort of fame or something, and then them actually joining a place that's extremely unsafe for children and especially young women.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, right, if you're going to be engaging with the rangatahi, with youth, then you have to have safeguards in place. You know, if you're going to be so aggressive in your acquisition of new blood, then you have to have your checks and balances and policies in place to be protecting those young people.
And they didn't even have a harassment policy. And that was their reason for not going after Ali Gammeter's abusers. We don't have a harassment policy. So anyway, in terms of ACT's response, they said that they were going to hire an employment lawyer, log that in your brain, to conduct an independent investigation into the allegations of misconduct. Andrea Twaddle has been appointed by the party to investigate the claims of sexual harassment made by Gammeter. Now, a couple of months later, in June, people are resigning left, right, and centre from Young ACT because they don't like how the investigation is going, and they think things have gotten worse since Gammeter resigning. So publicly, ACT and Young ACT are saying, we're doing everything correctly, we're responding to this issue, we're developing a policy, but in reality, the issue had festered, gotten worse, and victims were treated horribly. Look at how many people quit Young ACT. 1, Youth MP for Eugenie Sade, Azaria Howell tweeted, I feel like now is the time to speak out. Someone formerly involved with Young ACT sexually assaulted me on my first day in Wellington, and this was covered up. They also said that nothing had changed since Gammeter's resignation. 2, a member of Young ACT's new Equity Committee, Benjamin McKee, then announced his resignation. McKee, who was a member of Young ACT for about a year, said allegations of assault and misogyny were swept under the rug. Until the people responsible for heinous acts are responsible, none of us will ever be free. 3, a person called Koshan Modi also resigned from Young ACT via Twitter. They said that this was for reasons that boil down to a toxic culture of sexual harassment and rape, and they reiterated that Gammeter was not the only person impacted, with leadership turning a blind eye to this countless times. Okay, the following day, another person, Alex Oti, also gave their resignation. He said it's hard to find the words to describe the environment the Young ACT executive has created for its victims. The truth is, Young ACT is not a safe place for women to exist, and I cannot, in good faith, continue to support it while women are forced out. So this is the 4th person to resign after Gammeter, after 2 months of investigation, because clearly things had not improved. Now, Jago, remember, he was the party president at the time. And Newsroom says that Newsroom understands Jago told those in the ACT party and Young ACT not to make any comment in relation to the allegations and to refer all queries to him. Okay, so obviously Jago had a lot of say over this Young ACT group. But as you can see from David Seymour's response, he tried to distance the ACT party from Young ACT. He told the reporters that Young ACT was an affiliated group, but not an official youth wing, that it was allowed to use the party's logo and name so long as it didn't bring the party into disrepute. This means ACT oversight and pastoral care responsibilities were limited, both in terms of events and online spaces. This is an extremely convenient positionality for David Seymour to put himself in relation to Young ACT. But as we just saw from what Newsroom reported, Tim Jago told everyone in the ACT party and Young ACT to refer all allegations to him. So it's obviously not true that this party is separate from the ACT party. The president of ACT had final say on matters of Young ACT. We know this from what Newsroom told us about Jago. Now, going back to Seymour's response, he also victim blamed everyone who'd come out Ali Gammeter and the 4 other people who publicly resigned. He says, and I quote, "All of these people knew me and could call me if they really wanted to. Ditto other figures in the party such as Brooke, but they didn't. They chose to go and do it on Twitter." So he's calling into question their testimony because he said they didn't come to me first. Again, another classic abuser thing. If you don't come to me as the leader of the party of abuse, then we don't trust you. I mean, Gammeter responded, so I'll just read her response. She said, "We'd begged for change within the youth wing quietly for months, and that public resignation was the very last resort and didn't benefit us. It created a media shitstorm, and it made her drop out of uni for a trimester, and it destroyed all the opportunities they had in political circles." She says, "It's almost as if David doesn't want justice, he wants silence." Absolutely. It's a clear case of victim blaming. Oh, you didn't do it through the right route, so are you really telling the truth? But we saw from that evidence that Ali tried her best to deal with it in-house. She removed the people herself, for example, and then they just brought them back and they ignored her. So 2021, Surf Life Saving launches an official police investigation against Tim Jago, but he remains the president of ACT. So at this stage, Tim Jago has a live police investigation against him, and Tough on Crime ACT keeps him as president. And then the spin-off ACT leader, David Seymour, says he has given Jago his full confidence and he continues to be an excellent party president. All right, fast forward to 2022, and it was the very first time on November the 7th that the wife of the survivor messaged David Seymour about Tim Jago being a predator. She told him straight up, Tim Jago is a sexual predator. And the next day, a staff member just responded, anything to back it up. The wife responded explaining the situation, how he had abused her husband as a child, and then Seymour eventually responds to her personally, saying, "We believe the best way forward is for you to contact a lawyer who will ask you for details on the allegation, and having heard the details, they'll advise us on how to proceed further." So One News tells us a little bit more about who these lawyers that he referred them to are.
Allegations.
At the time, David Seymour offered the complainants the option of speaking to a law firm. That firm was SBM Legal. Its website says it's a leader in employment law. In an interview with One News last September, the complainants said they were puzzled by this offer.
I thought it was strange that they didn't sort of maybe suggest going to the police. It's not an employment issue for us.
Instead, they complained to police. 2 months later, Timothy Jago was arrested and stood down as ACT Party president.
So in fact, it was closer to 3 months. 3 months minus 1 week. I'm not sure why multiple news outlets rounded it down to 2 months. But yeah, that's what happened. They tried to send her to this employment lawyer called SBM Legal. Now, SBM Legal, one of their partners is called Penny Swarbrick. Penny Swarbrick. She's a partner of SBM Legal. Who is Penny Swarbrick? None other but David Seymour's late mother's best friend and David's godmother. Before dying, his mother asked Penny Swarbrick, "Please look after my boys." So he sent this person alleging his president of being a sexual abuser to a legal firm that's owned by someone who's an extreme, or partially owned by someone who's an extreme close relation of his. That's really dodgy, and I think that should be included in news reports about this as well. Moving on, this family, obviously, they were too smart, didn't fall for David Seymour's trap, and they went to the police, and eventually David Seymour tried to hassle her. He was like, "Hey, you still haven't messaged our employment lawyer." And the wife responded saying, "We've gone to the police now." And then he very coldly responded, "Thank you for that update. We will inform the lawyer that they should not expect to hear back from you." And indeed, the victim and his wife, the survivor and his wife, said that this was a really cold response, right? I mean, David Seymour never expressed any support, any sympathy. They closed the matter as soon as she said they're taking it to the police, and then they didn't look at it further at all. Until the 19th of January, 2023, when Jago was arrested and charged on the 19th of January. But he still didn't resign. So he was arrested and charged by the police for pedophilia, and he didn't resign until the 26th of Jan. So a week later, finally, a day after his first court appearance, Tim Jago resigns. At this stage, the ACT Party is still talking about being tough on crime, by the way. Now, there's a lot to say about the fact that Tim Jago kept his name suppression for so long. And just to quickly touch on it, the way that it works is judges reflect on if there are aspects in your life that will be impacted by your name being put out there. So if you're rich, if you have contacts in high places, if you're a political figure, if you have people who know your name, you're more likely to get name suppression because it's seen as having this extra impact on your life. But if you're poor, if no one really knows your name, if you don't have that many links in different places, then they just punish you even more on top of your poverty by not giving you name suppression. They're like, you've got nothing to lose. That's kind of how the system works right now. So as you can imagine, privileged, rich, and most likely white people are more likely to get name suppression, and that's what the stats reflect as well. Now, what was happening in the media around this time? So Tim Jago resigns as the president of ACT. I mean, he says it's for personal commitments, whatever. But it's just funny to me. One day after he resigns, Women's Day launches this puff piece on Jenna Lynch and her child that she had with the ACT Party chief of staff. And in the top, it says, the political editor introduces her beautiful baby and laughs off suggestions that her ACT Party fiance would ever stand a chance of telling her how to do her job. So they're preempting this complaint that she, as the political editor for News Hub at the time, wasn't giving enough coverage to the ACT Party problems, to the fact that their leader resigned, to all these sexual harassment issues that had occurred. And that continues to be the case today, right? As for the ACT Party's culture of sexual abuse and harassment, it doesn't end. It doesn't end with all of those stories because, as you saw, they never did anything about it. And in June 7th, 2024, we have this article, Tears and Resignations After Trainwreck ACT Party Election Campaign. And they say that at least half a dozen staff and volunteers left their roles with the party since the election, saying that the elements of the campaign were like the Hunger Games. The candidates and volunteers were regularly left in tears, and that a culture of fear took over the campaign when problems started arising with candidates. They listened to a leaked recording between two respected volunteers, and they said that they were expressing no confidence in the board and raising concerns about the party's treatment of women. So this was in 2024, after years of sexual abuse allegations and resignations and evidence of a toxic culture in Young ACT. We see that in the ACT Party as well, women are being mistreated and people resigned over it. Again, this kind of like, other than this article, this barely made it into the media consciousness. Until finally the 31st of January 2025, when the name suppression for Tim Jago is lifted. Again, there was very little in the media, especially 6 p.m. news on this, except the very bare minimum. On the first days that it happened, they just said Tim Jago's name was lifted. He used to be an ACT president. They just told you the bare minimum of the details. But not one, and I've looked at every article I could find on this, I've viewed every news clip about this, not one of them mentions the extremely long and widely documented history of sexual abuse, harassment, and enabling within the Young ACT, overseen by Seymour and Jago, and the mistreatment of women within ACT as late as 2024. None of them included a context that this was an issue within this party, that they had enabled this abuse, that Jago was overseeing it at this time, that Seymour knew all about it and victim blamed people all the time. That he has actually a history of Snapchatting children and approaching young women to join ACT, and then they got assaulted. None of this history, if you were to search Gammeter, Tim Jago, you'll find no new articles that link his abuse to her resignation. None at all. Again, and this is another interesting one, not one of these interviews that they've done with David Seymour over the past, well, every single day, right? They're always talking to Seymour. I haven't seen a single example of news media asking David Seymour about this to his actual face. Not a single one. And if we want to compare this with the coverage of Golriz, I mean, it was ridiculous. I remember in this one particular clip, they actually followed Chloe Swarbrick in the hallway of Parliament as she was trying to make her way to a room, asking questions about Golriz. And Chloe was like, Golriz is overseas. I already gave you my statement. Can you wait until she comes back? And they're just like running after her like a dog with a bone. The most embarrassing thing you'll see. Not one question to David Seymour's face because they're pathetic and they're cowardly. Not one. And I want to compare something as well. Just the amount of articles altogether. If you search Tim Jago abuse, you'll see that there are a total of 2 pages of news articles if you put it on the news section. Only 2. You go on the 3rd pages, nothing there. Nothing at all. Let's compare this with Golriz shoplifting, okay? 22 pages of news on shoplifting allegations, including the ridiculous police allegation where they tried to get her for putting things in her tote bag and she didn't even go out of the checkout. It was a clear hit job. Clearly the police are spying on her. Clearly they're leaking information to Leo Malloy. There's a lot of creepy stuff happening there, but even that made a lot of articles. They tried to get her. 22 pages. That's 10 times more pages than Tim Jago got. And yes, she was in the news cycle more. Right up until 1 week ago, they're making articles about her. But they've stopped doing stuff about Jago. I mean, there's no more articles coming out or there's no more news pieces coming out. They're trying to bury the story completely. Instead, they're sharing puff pieces like this. David Seymour and Alexandria Vincent Martelli engaged. This was also like around the time of Waitangi. So, you know, it reminds me of that Jenna Lynch story the day after Tim Jago resigned. And they're posting a puff story about her having a baby with the ACT Chief of Staff. And now, just days after his president is outed as a serial abuser that they potentially enabled, because they knew that woman messaged them 3 months, almost 3 months to the day that he resigned. They did nothing. They didn't do an internal investigation. They did nothing at all. And like I said, waited a week until after he was charged to be resigned. So there are a lot of valid questions to be asking David Seymour to his face about what he knew, about the culture of abuse within the ACT Party, but nothing. Nothing at all. No, you just get a puff piece about him getting engaged. So I've added this video as well because Kai Matara did a really good compilation, and there's just a little bit more stuff about the creepiness of the ACT Party.
Inappropriate behaviour is deeply ingrained into the ACT Party culture. Take David Seymour's repeatedly inappropriate behaviour around young people. At a Youth for ACT speech, he joked about politicians penetrating in the bedroom.
And the question is, where do politicians most often penetrate our sphere of liberty? Is it in the boardroom, or, as I hope not, in the bedroom?
He wore an objectifying "Got Meat" shirt at a college campus.
But it's this photo of the barbecue that's now backfired on ACT MP David Seymour.
A huge misjudgment on David's part.
It's the t-shirt in particular that's sparked debate.
It's clearly sexualised and it's clearly demeaning and it's clearly comparing women to meat.
At Epsom Girls High School, he told a student she was way out of his league, which is usually only reserved for people that a person finds attractive.
You're way out of my league.
He encouraged students to add him on Snapchat at a conference.
Is it still called Sadio?
Yeah.
Sweet, I'm not totally out of touch yet. You know, I'm on Snapchat, by the way. I just DBS83. I just put it out there.
He was in the news over Snapchats to school kids. He once Snapchatted a picture of a contraceptive to his followers saying, "Be safe, kids." This culture is reinforced by other incidents too. ACT youth leader Cameron Brown told Tanya Lim to get R-worded. After the 2023 election, 6 staff members and volunteers left the ACT party, with one of the reasons being the unfair treatment of women by the party.
Okay, so yeah, we talked about that last one. But yeah,
The
I mean,
ACT party brands itself.
The well is deep. The well is deep of examples of toxic behavior towards women, of sexual harassment towards women from the ACT party and from the Young ACT as well. Now, as for today, what's happening today? Ali Gammeter, the extremely brave person who resigned publicly and first blew all of this out in the open, she's being very public and outspoken about this now. On this tweet, you can see they say, former ACT President Tim Jago can be now named as a former political figure who sexually abused teenage boys. Now that the cat is legally out of the bag, I think some legitimate questions need to be raised about how David Seymour fits into the story. They go on. David Seymour's handling of the sexual abuse in Young ACT in 2019 and 2020 led to multiple months-long media scandal during which he victim blamed, accused victims of lying, and used Andrea Twaddle, an employment lawyer, to keep everything internal on the ACT party payroll, thereby allowing the ACT party to have the final say over the scope of the investigation and ultimately to manufacture, brackets, omit evidence from findings. I believe the party was attempting to do the same thing with the victims of Tim Jago. The culture that David Seymour knowingly allowed to exist in his party and on his payroll welcomed white supremacists, like we talked about, confirmed members of Action Zealandia with open arms, fostered cruel and misogynistic environments that clearly have not and will not change. And this is important. Rumors of Tim Jago's treatment of young men and or boys circulated around the youth wing in 2020. As his friend and close colleague, I find it impossible to believe that the kids knew before David Seymour did. And that's the point that needs to be made really clear. He knew. Seymour has been made abundantly aware of the culture of his party countless times. The only time it needs to be addressed is by him when there is a threat of public scrutiny. David Seymour explicitly believes that scrutinizing adult men for having unrestricted contact with teenage girls is man-bashing. He knows, but the fact of the matter is that evidently his allegiances lie with the rapists, misogynists, white supremacists, pedophiles, and weirdos. It's either a matter of complete and total incompetence or a genuine expression of allegiance, and he should resign. And then again, she tweets, I repeat, rumors of Tim Jago's conduct surrounding young boys and men circulated among Young ACT in 2020. David Seymour is lying about not knowing. And as we read, he had a lot to do with Young ACT. He was really involved in those groups. He was taking pictures with them. Heck, he was probably involved in messaging them, right? Because no, he was Snapchatting kids earlier. So I agree. If this rumors were circulating in 2020 in Young ACT, it is hard to believe that Seymour didn't know about it. And I do think that he should be pushed on that. But like I said earlier, none of this context is added. Ali Gammeter hasn't been interviewed by any of the news outlets covering this. They haven't brought her story back up. They haven't been quoting her tweets. So really, it is a matter of them just erasing all of this context and history that might make us understand that Tim Jago is just one example of a bigger issue within the ACT party. And today, and I find this extremely disturbing. Today, we have the ACT Party's Karen Chor as the Minister for Children and the Prevention of Family and Sexual Violence. An ACT Party person. Felix Poole, whom we talked about in depth, enabling the harassment and abuse of Ali Gammeter and other young women within Young ACT. He's the ACT Party candidate for Auckland Central and 25th on their list. So he hasn't gotten in any trouble. He's been elevated, if anything, since enabling all of that abuse. And David Seymour himself is Associate Justice Minister. So we have Justice Minister and the Minister for Prevention of Family and Sexual Violence and the Minister for Children. All of them are within the ACT Party. the party that hates children, the party that enables abuse and harassment and sexual harassment specifically of young women and teenagers. So I find that extremely disturbing. And one other thing I didn't note here is that the lawyer for Tim Jago back in 1999 is now a district court judge. So you just see in all of these cases, these enablers, these toxic people, they're still in positions of power. In fact, they keep getting elevated and elevated and elevated, just like Tim Jago was made president of the charity that he used to work at, the life-saving charity. So all of these are...
Not only that, but David Seymour is the charter school guy.
Right. And
charter schools, what are they? They are schools that can be set up with their own curriculum. They have different rules, I would assume, less regulations, less things that someone might deem, in the way of whatever their goals are as a charter school. From my perspective, he's the Minister of Regulations, and, with someone with such a history like this, so much problematic behavior, not having policies set up in his own party to deal with these things, not managing the youth wing appropriately with the appropriate policies for young people. Why are we comfortable with this being the guy who's greenlighting these types of schools going up around the country? It's insane.
And because charter schools have lower expectations for teachers, for example, they don't have to have certain qualifications. So it's really concerning. These are the questions we need our media to be asking, but then you have Jenna Lynch, married to ACT Party Chief of Staff, as the correspondent for Stuff News. Like, of course she's not going to go hard on the ACT Party, but it does boggle the mind about every other journalist. Like, where's all the other reporters? How could you guys have it in yourself to write article after article after and chase Colby Swarbrick about Golriz and then not write about this? It's absolutely shameful.
I think it's harder to have mud stick when it comes to the right-wing parties. I mean, I think it's kind of a right-wing thing to be bitter and to be spiteful. And when some bad news pops up, they love sharing it. They love sharing negative stories. But I think for those on the left wing of the political spectrum, we don't like sharing nasty stories. Like if something nasty happens, some story about pedophilia, I mean, that's not the kind of thing that a lot of us like to have on our timelines and our feeds. So,
So they're chasing right-wing clicks, you're saying?
Absolutely. And it's harder for justice on our side of things because we don't, we don't popularize these stories because they're just not nice things to talk about. But in my opinion, those on the right wing of the political spectrum relish in that type of stuff.
I also think it has to do with power, and that the Green Party represents the grassroots. They don't have real power. They don't have they don't have the same power that the ACT Party does. What do I mean by that? Well, the ACT Party is funded by literally the richest billionaires in this country. They are backed by the most powerful people in this country. Those powerful people, they have affiliates working in News Talk ZB, like their daughter-in-law and her husband or whatever. Then they have, Jenna Lynch.
Nuke Sponge agrees.
Yeah. And then you have Jenna Lynch as an affiliate of the ACT Party working for News Hub, but also just the fact that these extremely wealthy people that are funding ACT are likely the same people funding advertisements on these news channels. So for them, challenging ACT means challenging real power, but challenging the Greens just means shitting on us lowly grassroots people who actually work and care about the Greens. It's easier for them to do that.
Wow, what a report. What an incredible report. I knew you wouldn't stick to 30 minutes, though. So I'm going to recommend that we take a break. Everyone go get a glass of water, maybe a cup of tea. There are some things that we need to change over in terms of our equipment, and then we'll bring you the second half of our report,
which is about Waitangi events.
Ka pai.
All right.
So we'll see you all soon. Kia ora rā. Stay tuned. I don't think I like this chap, Seymour. Kia ora tātou. No mai hoki mai. Welcome back. So for the next half an hour, perhaps we'll see if I can stick into my time limit. We're going to be talking about Waitangi. Waitangi, and it's no longer Waitangi Day. We now say Waitangi Week. We like to have a whole week of celebrations and te tiriti awareness around Waitangi. So what would I like to say about Waitangi? Well, the Toitū activation was a lot different than what I thought it was going to be. We will get into that. I think it was a success. In general, Waitangi was really amazing. I really enjoyed my time. I pretty much just stayed in the forum tent. And the forum tent didn't receive any media attention at all. The forum tent was all about solution-focused conversations around how do we move forward as te iwi Māori, not relying on government-based solutions. And sadly, there was nothing there from the media in terms of those types of things that were shared. And I think that contributes to a lot of people like David Seymour who say that we don't have solutions and things like that. Well, they don't talk about it in the media. They don't show us talking about that. And unfortunately, I was hoping that it was going to be live streamed and recorded, the forum tent. Unfortunately, it was not. So we're unable to bring you that corridor. But one of the things, for example, Annette Sykes, she's such a legend. She showed up with this little booklet, and it's got a range of resolutions in it. And the resolutions are pretty much geared around te tiriti o Waitangi and he whakaputanga, our sovereignty as te iwi Māori, what we can do to get there. It's got some goals in it that we're trying to meet by the next Waitangi that will be reported on. So some actionable things that are really promising. Now, the first thing that I want to start with is this clip of this haka. It's an incredible haka. I'll play for you just the first half, and then I might turn down the volume just to make a few comments. But nau mai hara mai ki te kōrero o Waitangi. So I get excited just watching this, but so this was after the first whai kōrero, which was Aotearoa Edwards, and normally you see a waiata, something nice, something chill, but this haka sent a very, very clear message, and it has all of the kai haka from the start of the pōwhiri who also joined in. So what an incredible showing here, and for me this is a great example of how united we are. Well, from this perspective anyway, and I have to acknowledge all of our hapu leaders, a lot of our hapu leaders who either aren't invited or for whatever reason they have, don't come to Waitangi. We're all individual nations. Like here where I am, Ngāi Tū Te Auru is our hapu here, and I consider this little bit of whenua that we have here to be the nation of Ngāi Tū Te Auru. And no one can speak for Ngāi Tū Te Auru except for the leaders of our hapu here. But anyway, in terms of who is engaging and who shows up for Ngāpuhi, I mean, here we have Rāwhiti Roa. He was one of the leaders of the hikoi. So one of the protest leaders. Another person that we have in there, of course, Aotearoa Edwards, he's the chair of Ngāti Wai, so one of our iwi chairs leaders. And in there as well, we can see Moko Te Pānia. He's right there in the corner, the mayor of the Far North. And so, we've got we've got our councils, we've got our protesters, we've got our iwi chairs, leaders. And for me, this is a great sign, a great tohu in terms of us coming together. With the previous activation that happened at Waitangi, it was a little bit unorthodox. It was very tika. It was amazing in terms, like, it's hard to even call it a protest or an activation. It was just Māori. That's what it was. But it was fresh, it was rangatahi led, the kohanga generation led that out. And I would say it was very brave. It was very staunch.
So just as a reminder, that's when a group of us sang during David Seymour's speech, whakarongo e noho, listen and sit down, and we sung over him.
Yeah, and we inserted ourselves into the proceedings. It wasn't on the program. I'm hoping that some discussions took place. I'm sure there were. But it was quite unofficial in terms of us inserting ourselves into last year's pōwhiri. But this year was a little different. There was a lot more coordination. And everyone was on the same page. Not quite everyone, but the vast majority of us were united in the type of response that we wanted to bring to the government. And just to give people some awareness of what did happen with the Toi 2 activation, we essentially boycotted the pōwhiri. I guess you could say, us youngins, the protesters, those who were supporting Hikoi mō te tiriti, we showed up at the political pōwhiri. Eru Kapakingi gave a address to the politicians as they were entering. He did it over the microphone. And then we turned our backs and then we walked back to the forum tent to have our solution-focused conversations about how do we get to what we call our Hawaii Hou, or this new Aotearoa, this new Hawaii. Because, of course, we're not going to listen to these politicians, and I think we should be encouraging more people to boycott speaking events where these politicians are. And I think we should be encouraging people to be having that kōrero themselves, that solution-focused kōrero, instead of wasting their time with these politicians. So it's a great showing for Ngāpuhi, a great showing of our strength in terms of how united we are. And the haka that we just saw, aha Ngāpuhi, that was the same haka that was used by te runanga iwi o Ngāpuhi. This is Mane Tahere. He's younger than me, actually, this guy, but he's the chair of the runanga of Ngāpuhi, and they use the same haka.
This kōrero.
And so, we've got the chair of Ngāti Wai, we've got the chair of Ngāpuhi. All of these groups are coming together with a united showing against the government, which, for myself, and I won't generalize it out, but I'll just say for myself, I have an extreme distrust of authority, an extreme distrust. I was homeschooled, maybe that has a bit of something to do with it. But to see our runanga, our various iwi chair leaders coming together like this and reflecting the thinking and the vibe, the aspirations, the kōrero, that some of us, outside of these circles, for us to be on the same page, it's quite an amazing thing. Like I really love it. I'm really excited and looking forward to the future of what it's going to be like for Ngāpuhi, because there's a lot of bravery coming out, a lot of people stepping out where I'm not used to, and I guess I'm young and maybe I'm naive, but it feels like a new flavor. It feels like the kohanga generation is influencing our kui and kaumatua, and those more older ones amongst us who have cemented positions that are hard to budge, but it feels like there is a lot of budging. It feels like there's a lot of flexibility going on here. Of course, Ngāti Rehia Kipa Munro told David Seymour, kaua e hara mai ki Waitangi. It's not. I'm not used to seeing hapu leaders or iwi leaders being so staunch and so direct with these types of requests to politicians. So again, another good sign. But not everyone was happy with the pōwhiri. I'm going to bring up Shane Jones now, but I must say the only two parties that had bad things to say about the pōwhiri was the two parties that are accused of being the most racist, New Zealand First and the ACT Party. Paul Goldsmith, he had a little bit to say about it. He said that the mic being moved, which we'll talk about, was disappointing. But, he's the Minister for Treaty Settlement Negotiations. So, he's got to be really careful with how he talks when it comes to Ngāpuhi. So let's hear from Shane Jones. He's got a little bit to say around tikanga, and then I'll make some comments.
There's an unhelpful virus that's crept into a lot of our Māori welcome ceremonies, and they're starting to bark and they're starting to yell in the wero. That is never ever the culture. When I grew up, when the welcome ceremony was conducted and you had the challenge, we always brought 2 or 3 runners with us, and those runners chased the person doing the wero, and if they could catch them, they rubbed their head in horse shit. Sadly, I didn't bring a bag of horse shit with me today.
So, it's just ridiculous. What an outlandish thing to say. So he's suggesting that if he had brought a bag of horse shit, that he would have rubbed it in Edu Kapakingi's face.
As if he'd be able to catch her.
Right. I mean, don't want to be, I'm sure he's a fit man, Shane Jones, but of course. So, he thinks he's got the right to define tikanga. And of course he doesn't. And in this case, Shane Jones is a manuhiri for this pohiri. He's a manuhiri. The hosts were Ngāpuhi. The way that the hosts ran everything was completely up to them. That's the tikanga. You go with the tikanga of your hosts. For me, what Shane Jones represents is he's part of that old crew that I was talking about in terms of those who are hard to budge. But he can see that the world is changing. He can see iwi leaders saying the same thing that the protesters are saying, which is a radical shift, in my opinion. And, Shane Jones used to be an activist for Māori rights, or at least he attended a protest and was wearing a t-shirt. That's all I really know. And so, maybe he has tried that route, that more radical route, and he has cemented within himself that, no, I'd rather take the capitalist route. I'd rather assimilate into the system because that's the only way for our people. So I don't know what's going on in Shane Jones's mind, but for me, I think he is seeing that shift, and this is his attempt to try and bring a bit of it back and to discourage us from going down that route. The next thing I'll bring up is just a few comments that David Seymour made on the day. He made all sorts of outlandish comments, but given our time constraints, here's just a little bit.
And perhaps blaming me is a convenient distraction from other problems. Here are some problems that you can't turn your back on because the numbers do not lie. Māori home ownership, Māori school attendance, Māori victimisation by criminals, Māori unemployment, Māori incomes and life expectancy.
And so he was shunned. People turned their backs.
Ngā mihi, and I look forward to working with you. You know you want to.
You want to. Hey, just the smugness of David Seymour is next level. So he was making those comments, bringing up the negative statistics for te iwi Māori, and I guess the first thing that we would say is that when you bring up these negative statistics and you don't explain why those negative statistics exist, because of colonization, because of the loss of our land, because of the lack of social investment, all of these things, you assume that those negative statistics are inherent or are at the fault of those individuals that you're talking about. I mean, when you say all of the prisons are filled with Māori, all of the homeless people on the streets are Māori, when the media blows up that type of kōrero and doesn't give the context, the viewer is left to fill in the context themselves.
Yeah, every single time they repeat these statistics on the news without explaining, what they're doing is revalidating the idea that Māori are inferior in the minds of racist people in this country, in the minds of just the public in general. They're reinforcing the idea that these are things that are just inherent to Māori, as opposed to things that are the result of colonization. So the reason David Seymour is speaking like this is because he wants to hide the fact that it is actually his government and the crown in general that he represents that is causing these negative statistics. And he wants to make it more of a race issue in order to spark racism. And like you were telling me earlier, it's usually the other way around.
The cheek of this guy. Normally it would be, you know, this is the obligation of the government to attend Waitangi and to listen to the people. And it's normally us that would be saying, these statistics are bad because of your guys' fault of this and this and this. But it's like he's reversed it. And there's something really perverse about it. Normally we'd be telling the government what we want, but it feels like he's flipped it on us, and it's just yeah, I find it to be really insulting.
And this is a tactic around the world. Like, you know, we see this in all colonized places. They will, for example, bomb the shit out of your country, and then they'll say, oh wow, look at how backwards they are, they're still living in the Stone Ages. You know, it's kind of like, you know, the extreme version of that is today Trump saying, oh look, well there's nothing in Gaza now, so we should just ethnically cleanse that land anyway. Who the hell made Gaza like this? It was you. It was the United States. So it's along that same vein.
Kapai. Okay, we've got a little bit more from David.
Actually, ideas don't hurt. You know, it's trying to intimidate people, take away their ability to speak, threaten them with war dances. Some people might say that that was threatening. When people get up, they do.
Okay, so that comment about ideas can't hurt.
I mean, it's ironic because in his very speech, we don't have a clip of this, but in his very speech, he says, he accuses Ngāpuhi of pouring poison in the children's ears. So he thinks Ngāpuhi is capable of pouring poison in children's ears, and he felt so proud of himself, to quote Shakespeare, because he's so civil and smart, but he thinks his words cause no harm.
Classic,
how does that work?
Classic colonialism, eh? The civility, the man in a suit, just saying things, but of course his policies are ripping our people apart. But hey, at least he's polite and wears a suit. And now the next thing about Seymour, and why I wanted to pull him up is, and the reporter pulls him up. She's a little bit hard to hear, so I might replay it a couple times, but let's just have a listen. He's talking about, he refers to haka as a war dance. I'll play the clip and then we'll talk about it.
Their war dance, sorry. You know, it's trying to intimidate people, take away their ability to speak, threaten them with war dances. Some people might say that that was threatening. When people get up, they do their war dance, sorry.
Why can you refer to tikanga and take in te reo Māori, but you can't refer to haka in te reo Māori?
Well, and up to you.
So what the reporter just said, she's pulling him up for, you know, interchanging his language on words like haka, calling it a war dance, which is completely the wrong context. This is completely out of context, I'll just say. You know, even in the classic internet Māori dictionary, haka, it doesn't even say war dance in there. And so he's using a kind of obscure wording here for haka. He's being very deliberate. You know, if you do a haka at a wedding or at a tangi, or, you know, it has nothing to do with war. Of course, it's just a part of our culture, a beautiful part of our culture. And he's seeking to demonize it and draw associations with it, with barbarism and savagery and, you know, warring nations and things like that. And the reporter calls him out on this. And let's just listen to this.
Your last question, I referred to war dance as a haka and as a war dance, and a haka as a war dance. I mean, we have two languages, they're interchangeable.
Why don't you also use protocol, say, when you talk about tikanga?
So that was great. She just said, why don't you use the word protocol instead of the word tikanga? How come we don't see you doing any interchanging with those words? And for me, it's because tikanga has come up in some spaces, and the criticism against tikanga has been that it's too vague. And if he were to interchange English language with it and sometimes call it, you know, Māori customs or Māori protocol, I think the way that I interpret it is that that would be giving unknowing people a piece of the puzzle in terms of what tikanga actually is. But he's not willing to do that. He's not willing to give that extra little bit of information about it because he's happy to keep things like tikanga or mana or karakia even probably as vague concepts.
And I'll just say, like, along that same vein, the government is happy to keep terms like kāinga ora and oranga tamariki, but they want to change everything else to English. So the question is why, and I think they keep the te reo Māori names for things that they want to demonize. And in this case, it was actually the other way around. He gave the English well, it wasn't even an accurate translation, but he gave a possible obscure definition of haka in English because he thought war dance made Māori look bad, and that's the only reason he used that translation. It's blatantly obvious.
Absolutely. And now listen to how he responds. I'll just take it back a little bit.
Everyone has a different level of understanding. I don't claim.
Oh, aroha mai. Oh, it's back. I'll take it back a second.
Everyone has a different level of understanding. I don't claim to be an expert, but I do my best. And maybe if we, we'll try to be a little bit more positive instead of gotcha, we could all get somewhere.
So, he's playing stupid. He's playing ignorant, as if these language choices of him are not on purpose. And she raises a legitimate question, just like Guy Williams did, some legitimate questions. And his strategy is to shrug it off and then accuse her of being negative about the situation instead of actually answering the question, and it's a very common tactic for David.
Yeah, it wasn't a gotcha question. It was just a straight up and down question.
Absolutely. What are we ending it with?
One of the things I've said is that my bill will actually enhance the mana of the treaty.
Oh, that's right. Just something that I thought was absolutely outrageous. Him saying that his bill has enhanced the mana. And of course, that will be a purposeful choice of words there, using the word mana. Because, I guess it's for me, it's, he can't be that racist if he's happy to casually use a few te reo Māori words here and there. And I think that's a big part of his shtick. And I would say, because of the Treaty Principles Bill, yes, it has been activating a lot of people. Just like in the early days of colonization, when we first signed Te Tiriti, we came together to fight against colonization. And now we're having a similar thing with his bill. But that's not adding mana to Te Tiriti from the perspective that he's talking about. Not at all. That's kind of an unintended consequence of his bill, I would say. So, I guess thanks, David, for that. But, dragging us through the mud like this is never the way to get outcomes. So I don't know, maybe some David Seymour fans will try and say that, he's brought Māori together. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Kapai. So, no. You want to address Guy Williams?
Oh, just that he addressed David Seymour's bullshit. He called him out on saying that he's improving the mana of Te Tiriti, as well as spreading misinformation. He called him out for saying that Māori didn't provide any substantial arguments. Guy Williams told him, well, actually they did. I heard them. You just dismissive of them. And just because you disagree, you say that they don't have good arguments. So he presented counter narratives to the lies that David Seymour presents to journalists. Unlike every single other journalist there, well, there was a little bit challenge there about his use of the word tikanga, but in terms of his lies and racism that he perpetuates the whole time, Guy Williams called him out in a way that other journalists don't. Now, the other journalists, though, they were not supportive of Guy Williams. They laughed along with David Seymour when he responded with personal attacks, because David Seymour didn't actually address anything Guy Williams said. He just started attacking him as a person. He was like, you're a shit comedian. You're not asking any serious questions. Who else has serious questions? Other journalists are like, oh, me. Pick me, David. And then after the fact, this article in the spin-off by Madeline Chapman. And she says, oh, it was a slam dunk. She said that he was at the front top, just.
Oh, technical difficulties. Aroha mai whānau.
So at the top, she says that he got publicly owned by David Seymour.
Wow, way over exaggeration.
And then later on, she says that he was humiliated by David Seymour.
Huge over exaggeration.
It's not true. Like, that's not what I saw happened. I did not see him being humiliated. What I saw was him challenging Seymour in a way that other journalists should be. What I saw was David Seymour responding with personal attacks instead of answering it. And what I saw was journalists siding on the side of power instead of a person who was trying to call power into question. So Madeline Chapman, to be honest, this is pathetic. This is embarrassing. What are you doing? Dunking on the guy who bravely stood up to David Seymour while the rest of the journalists did nothing. I completely agree with this tweet from Mick Hall. He said, Williams was isolated, not humiliated. Subsequent remarks by mainstream fringe media hacks were not only ridiculously condescending, but also cheerlead Seymour's personal attacks on him, geared to increase his isolation further. Pathetic. Exactly. I think, you know, what this does, what these journalists are doing now, is they're setting the standard for other journalists. You must fall in line, and falling in line means not challenging David Seymour's overarching narratives, not calling him out on his bullshit properly. And if you do step out, we, as the other weak journalists who do usually stand there and not ask him the hard questions, we're going to dunk on you. We're going to attack you personally, and we're going to validate David Seymour bullying people for asking him good questions. I think this is really embarrassing from the journalists that are attacking him right now.
Tautoko. All right, let's move on. Here, I'm playing this clip because consistent among pretty much every media outlet, they made everything about David Seymour. Like everything, every story opens with Seymour. And not only that, and, you know, probably we've all fallen into this trap to a degree, but we've made everything about the Treaty Principles Bill, which is a dead bill. And it's almost as if we're talking about, you know, the media and political parties keep talking about the Treaty Principles Bill and how it's not going to go past first reading because the government has nothing else for us. The only thing that they can promise us is that they're not going to take this bill any further, but it's already in their coalition agreement. But because they've got nothing for us, all they can say is that they promise to keep their promise on this thing that we already knew they were going to keep.
Yeah, and just a quick reminder before you start that video, in the previous Jenna Lynch video, we saw her say they turned around, the Ngāpuhi people turned around during David Seymour's speech. Now watch what actually happens.
Kapai.
Then, just as the first representative of the government, Māori Development Minister Tama Pōtaka, stood to speak, a group of 20 wahine Māori from Te Tai Tokiro made their way forward onto the marae Aotea, turning their backs in protest. The men following shortly after.
We've suffered the brunt of consecutive governments since the signing of our beautiful Tiriti o Waitangi, which is very clear.
Aroha mai, hine rangi. Just wanted to interrupt and say, these wahine don't just talk about the Treaty Principles Bill. You know, listen to their kōrero in terms of why they're here. Not one mention of the Treaty Principles Bill.
Governments since the signing of our beautiful Tiriti o Waitangi, which is very clear. We shouldn't have to be still fighting, but we are still fighting. So that's why we are here today, to try and minimise giving to this coalition government the anger they seek and the reaction they seek. We've leant into our tikanga, into our history.
We're still fighting this fight for our rangatiratanga, for our manaakitanga, for our kaitiakitanga, for our oranga, all those things we're still fighting, and we shouldn't be in 2024.
It represents the here 827 mokopuna that are in state care, the numbers of our women and our men that are in prisons that continue to rise at the hands of this government. So what we represent and what we tangi for today is all of that. There's a lot to cry about and there's a lot to be angry about. So how did it go today? We hope that we represented the mamaitanga of our people well today.
Beautiful kōrero. And, you know, some of the kōrero that she was sharing, you know, you could relate it to the Treaty Principles Bill, but she wasn't talking about it and labeling it as the Treaty Principles Bill. And when you do that, it removes all the complexities and the nuance. So it's good to talk about the specifics in terms of what will be impacted if that bill gets across, rather than just simply naming the bill in and of itself.
They turned around for Pōtaka, the National Party guy. They spoke about
the first speaker, I believe,
a wide range of issues and policies that predate even this coalition government. So I would go as far as to say that the media is lying when they say, A, they turned their backs to David Seymour, and B, that it was all about the Treaty Principles Bill.
Killed up. Now, aroha mai again, whānau. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty, so we're just going to, again, I'm sorry, we have to switch something over on in terms of our gear. So a quick little break, maybe go to the wharepaku, another cup of tea. Aroha mai.
2 minutes.
We will be right back. We will be right back. Kia ora tātou. We're back. No mai hoki mai. We're well on track for doing another 3-hour live stream.
But we won't. Promise.
Oh, ka pai. So, I'll just say thank you to everyone who's leaving comments. And I'll just give people just maybe one more minute, because I said maybe go to the wharepaku. Feel free to leave comments, everyone. I'll just say someone brought up the Regulatory Standards Bill in the comments, and I made a comment about this in the last one. And, you know, I get, from my perspective, it's just that, you know, National didn't need the Treaty Principles Bill to disestablish Te Aka Whai Ora. You know, there are all of these breaches that are currently taking place that don't require these kind of, I would say, philosophical arguments. And from my perspective, the ACT Party provides arguments and narrative-based things to help bring the justifications for the types of policies that the National Party pushes through. And I really do support learning about the Regulatory Standards Bill, and I think it would be awful, but the Labour Party has already agreed to repeal it within their first 100 days. And just for me, there are things that the National Party and the Labour Party agree on. Things like not bringing in a capital gains tax. Things like, to be honest, not honouring Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So there are these things that both parties don't agree on that I think we should be focusing on. But we'll save that kōrero and any criticisms that y'all might have against that kōrero for another time. We'll roll back into it, but I just want to say thank you to people leaving comments. When they are nice comments, we'll try and bring them up on the screen. Okay, so rolling back into it, we just had our incredible wahine essentially leading this activation. They've got their paraikete whero, the red blankets, which are now, you know, they already were iconic, but now for me, they're just next level iconic. And of course, you know, you heard the kōrero. They didn't just talk about the Treaty Principles Bill, and you saw that they activated against Tama Pōtaka. So, and he was the first speaker, is my understanding, from the government. And so it's not just about Seymour. And here is a really awesome insight in terms of what happened from Hone Harawira. He went on the Planting Seeds podcast by Rani Rarewiri. Let's have a listen.
Ngāpuhi said, don't come, but they ended up coming. What do you make of all of that?
I would not have allowed them to have the microphone. I would have kept the woman in the middle, and I would have kept them singing until they realised they weren't, they'd been welcomed. They'd had one person speak, and that's enough. The rest of you, I just want to show off your policies and show off yourselves. Well, we're not here for that, sorry. You've been welcomed. But welcomed in as brief a fashion as Ngāpuhi wants you to understand. And to see David Seymour get up, and then all of the kaumata stand up and turn their backs on it. Wow, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. So I stood up and I supported them. Then I saw our women had all been squeezed into a corner, and I thought, them with their red blankets, they'd become a very powerful visual force, but never allowed to show it. And apparently they've been squeezed up in that box by the police. So I just walked up and said, hey, come out here and take the line right down. And they said, oh, the police don't know. The police, mate, they don't own this place. This is ours. Now, come on.
Sure, Matua.
The cops would say, oh, what's happening? I says, hey, get out of the way. Don't touch the woman. You have no authority to touch the woman, and leave them alone. Your job is to protect those guys over there, not touching the woman. They'll piss off. Woman once they did it, boom, it just changed the whole ahu up there. And I thought, they were great, eh?
Wow.
They didn't do anything special except stand there, be strong, turn their backs. So they're facing their own kaumātua and their own people. And, they just sent a really strong presence, I think. Yeah.
He says they didn't do anything special, but you can hear in the way that he's talking, it was an incredibly special moment. And just because I like these little insider things, I just like to see in this video here of our wahine all up the front here, and you can see them, they're all up the front. But then as the clip plays along, you can see Hone, he's behind that gazebo pole. He's like, target acquired. I know what to do here. And he played a really big role in last year's activation in helping us to enter the marae Aotea. So a big mihi to Matua Hone. Don't always agree with all of the kōrero, but what a legend. Deserves all of the praise. And I just go back to saying, you can see for him how special it was for the kaumātua to be participating in this activation. You could see from him just how much that means, how significant that is. And for me, that's a really heartwarming, incredible thing. As a uri of Rahiri, I think the future is very bright for Ngāpuhi. And now let's hear from Aotearoa Edwards, the chair of Ngāti Wai. He's the one who moved the microphone from David Seymour. Oh, you had something you want to say, Samah?
Oh, just someone noted this in a comment, and I noticed this as well. So we talked a lot about how the news gave a lot of airtime to David Seymour and Shane Jones. They followed Shane Jones out of the boat and filmed him entering. They showed a whole bunch of David Seymour's speech during the pōwhiri, and then afterwards they ran to David Seymour and Shane Jones for more interviews. And then they gave them a lot of time to insult people. Shane Jones insulted Eru Kapakingi and said he was barking and, likening him to an animal. And they both said that it was disrespectful the way that Aotearoa removed the mic. Well, Eru was not given any time whatsoever to respond to these insulting accusations. Aotearoa was given a little bit of time on one of them, but as someone in the comments noted, the audio
it was terrible.
Was bad.
It was like it was shot on like a fisheye lens as well or something. Like the aspect ratio was strange, like just so secondary, not important to them.
Yeah. And you contrast it with 1,000 mics and act faces. And honestly, again, all I have to say is that you journalists, you should be embarrassed of yourselves, because if you're going to show someone attacking the whole kāinga, then at the very least, give those people an equal amount of time to respond. And the reason they don't do that, I believe, is because when you listen to this video, you'll see just how eloquent and how beautiful Aotearoa's kōrero is. And they don't want the nation to see that, because if they did, they would know that it was the Māori nation that was truly civilized in this country, and that it was David Seymour who's the abusive, uncivilized pedo protector.
Absolutely. They haven't necessarily done this, but they haven't provided the room to combat it. They'd rather see him as a thug right? Some thug got up and moved the microphone. But listen to the kōrero. Aotearoa Edwards. I have a lot of aroha for him, a lot of support for him. I think he's fantastic.
Well, he was asked not to attend by his own hapu. The prompt on the part of the home people to stand and turn their backs to him was a signal to stop speaking and to sit down. And he intentionally continued to speak over the top of them. I'm also mindful about the kōrero from our matriarch, whai ao te motu, whina kupa. Be careful what our children hear. The hollow words that were being shared were painful, and they were falling on flames that are burning in our hearts in terms of the mamai, from the insult of the audacity, really, to assume an authority to be able to overturn the promises and oaths made between our tupuna.
They will come again, year after year, and the people of Waitangi will again welcome them. But it does send a warning shot across the bows that there are certain etiquettes, tikanga, to observe, and perhaps the soon-to-be Deputy Prime Minister will have learnt from the experience. So from your end, not disrespectful, respecting the call from the haukainga.
And strong reminders were made in the messages shared that our mana, our rangatiratanga, and the mauri of our rangatiratanga is of this whenua. It's a mauri take. And it cannot be deleted, it cannot be erased. And the determinant of our tomorrow sits in our hands. Our rangatiratanga we carry, we hold, we don't seek from anybody else. And so the signal today to Parliament is to remember that the mātāmua of those mana is rangatiratanga. It was here long before Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and it remains, and it will remain in our mokopuna. The dust still lingers in the air from the hikoi last year, where we saw our tamariki, our mokopuna, blowing on the ashes and the embers of that fire lit by our tupuna, and it burns bright today, and it will continue to burn into the future. But the other part too is the shame of their actions. I heard them say that the Treaty Principles Bill will not see the light of day in terms of its full intent, yet they still allowed it to surface, knowing full well the pain it would place not only on Te Ao Māori, but the shame on our nation. And so I heard that through the hikoi, not only from within Te Ao Māori, but Aotearoa katoa, aspiring for a country that's honourable. And so those were the sentiments and messages relayed to them today.
Beautiful kōrero.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful, and the complete opposite of the picture that our media painted, painting people as uncivilized effectively, when in reality, this is the picture of civilization. This is the picture of honor. I really, really respect Aotearoa Edwards. He's been on the front lines with protests with us before as well, whether it was when we were protesting against Kaipara Mayor being racist. He was there right at the front. When we were protesting Julian Batchelor, he stood at that door because they weren't letting Māori in. It was a whites-only meeting. They were effectively implementing an apartheid meeting. And Aotearoa Edwards stood at that door and he said to police, "I'm not moving." And he blockaded the door, even though that wasn't part of the protest.
Off the cuff. It was completely off the cuff, that one. And just so much respect for him. You don't often see, like I was saying before, our iwi chairs, leaders, putting themselves out there on the front lines. Because, what is it going to do? It's going to set a precedent. We're watching our leaders be brave. It's going to make the rest of us brave, or at least step up our game a little bit. So, ka nui te aroha kia koe. E matua. Aotearoa, he's one of those types you feel so embarrassed to speak Pākehā to him because he comes up to you with his beautiful te reo Māori, and for me, I'm not fluent, so but I always feel a bit whakamā. But anyway, I'm always like, I don't want to speak the language of the colonizer around you. I'm getting there, whānau, I'm getting there. Ka pai. What else have we got? Oh, okay. So next we've got footage from the dawn ceremony. Let's take a look. Footage from the dawn ceremony. So this is the day after. And of course,
3 news coverage.
We're starting with 3 news coverage. And of course, look, who do they start with?
Before dawn broke at Waitangi, people gathered to pray. But under the cloak of darkness, this year, the prayer turned political.
To renegotiate the terms of a marriage usually requires both spouses to be at the tepu. But it seems our spouse, the Crown, has filed for divorce while we were blissfully unaware.
A not-so-subtle reference to David Seymour's Treaty Principles Bill. Winston Peters was...
And, well, I think it was correct that it was a reference to the...
It might have been.
There's some assumptions going on.
Yeah.
Okay, kapai. So, not bad coverage so far from Jenna. Not bad. But the thing for me that I like about this is that normally the dawn service is an apolitical kind of event. It's just people reading off prayers, niceties that, And so a political message was brought in by one of the speakers. I should have looked them up, Aroha mai. But one of the speakers brought up a political message, which I guess is frowned upon. But no one booed, it was applauded. The political message was applauded. Mm-hmm. And so for me, this, again, it's a sign of where we're going as a society and the kinds of things that we're letting in to become part of our culture and things that we are accepting. Waitangi, these discussions, they are inherently political. And if you're trying to depoliticize them, then you're trying to erase Māori critiques, Māori aspirations, Māori feedback, Māori perspectives when you try to make these things apolitical. So I think it's a great sign of where we're going.
Was set to give a prayer, and no one turned up to do it.
Sorry, and just for context, so now they're just noticing that Winston Peters was not present.
He was meant to give a prayer.
He was meant to give a prayer, but he was a no-show. And now, look at this guy, Shane Jones. Now, for those of you who don't know, Shane Jones runs a party at his place every Waitangi. And, what is it? It's a lobbying party. There are various members from, this BNZ, Auckland Airport, huge business leaders in Aotearoa who attend. Of course, there are politicians. Yes, we are judging you for attending, politicians. And then, of course, there are journalists who attend this party as well. And notoriously, Shane Jones is always hungover on the 6th, the day after his party. You can see it on his face and just listen.
Oh, okay. I'm not aware of that.
Again.
Oh, okay. I'll replay it. No interruptions.
Subtle reference to David Seymour's Treaty Principles Bill. Winston Peters was set to give a prayer, and no one turned up to do it.
Oh, okay. I'm not aware of that.
The crowd stayed silent for Seymour.
So wasted.
He is smashed. He's smashed.
It's so
and
embarrassing.
why was Winston Peters not there? Was he in a gutter as well? What is going on?
They have no respect for this day. They talk about tikanga this, to respect that. Then he shows up like this, and Winston Peters doesn't even show because he got too wasted the night before. It's so embarrassing.
The crowds.
And so now, moving on, Jenna Lynch makes a comment.
The crowd stayed silent for Seymour's very short address.
Very soon we will see the sun rise over the beautiful Bay of Islands, one of the best reminders of why we all love this beautiful land.
Keeping the ceremony civil.
Civility?
Yeah, so again, we're seeing this language around civil, and of course, what's the opposite of civil? Uncivilized. The classic trope of the uncivilized Indigenous person. They're trying to contrast Ngāpuhi, who did interrupt, who did turn their backs and take the mic off. They protested in many ways. With the dawn service, they're saying Ngāpuhi is uncivilized. That's what the subtext of her saying that is. So every time they refer to something as civil, they're trying to contrast that with another type of behavior, right? But of course, also, it's a lie. Because people weren't completely quiet. we can see in the raw footage, eh?
Yeah, so now we're looking at raw footage from Whakaata Māori. Listen here. So he was heckled. There was a boo. And there was, of course, you know, no one said shh or reprimanded this guy. In fact, they laughed, which again, I think is another good sign. But more interestingly, let's just take this clip back a little bit. There's a lot of subtle things and not so subtle things that the media likes to do, right? So here, just take a mental note of these guys here. We've even got this fella in a kafia listening to David. They look like they're listening very intently.
Over the beautiful Bay of Islands, one of the best.
And now here we've got Julia Whaiporti, and she almost looks like she's looking with admiration while she's listening to David's speech. And, you know, it's kind of like a Mona Lisa smile, but to me that looks like a smile on Julia's face.
They look like both look like they're quite serene in this moment. So they're both looking beautiful. They're listening intently, as were the two men. And obviously, 3 News is trying to tell us that these looks were happening during David Seymour's speech. Another lie.
Another lie. So this look of admiration that's coming from Julia right now, is that look of admiration really for David, or is something else going on here?
Back to the raw footage.
Exactly, back to the raw footage we go. Familiar faces. Okay, so this is where the clip has come from. And who are they listening to?
Toitu te tiriti.
Chloe Swarbrick saying Toitu te tiriti. That's where the admiration is coming from. So it's just, you know, it's just silly, right? It's just ridiculous. They've taken Chloe out of that clip and they've put David there. And normally, you know, when you overlay clips on things, it's like to cover something up or something like that. But the raw footage of David, there are no cuts. It's just him talking. So they have purposefully decided to put this clip over David to send some type of message that Māori are listening to David with admiration.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely inappropriate. And isn't Julia also on the Human Rights Commission as well?
Among many other things, I'm sure, but yes.
Yeah, so she's actually a really incredible advocate for Māori that's really well known. And they've used her face, her sacred face, to tell a lie about David Seymour, to paint an image that Māori were listening intently with looks of admiration. You cannot do that. You cannot grab a footage. It reminds me of this other time, I'm not sure if it was 3 News or the other one, but they've put the footage of Gaza's destruction while they were talking about Israel being destroyed. So, you know, they have a very shameful history of doing this. And you know, we had to hunt for this footage. It's not easy to find out that they've done this. We had to go back and watch the raw footage, and we were like, hey,
that's familiar.
They actually stole that and they put it on David Seymour. I mean, I consider that a lie.
So it's just like, you know, how many more things like this are they doing? How many more subtle little messages are they slipping in? Who knows? And so what else happened? Well, of course, Luxon didn't go to Waitangi. He decided to go down to Kaitahu. Let's hear a little bit from Luxy Boy.
Tahu's values and aspirations resonate with those of my government.
There's been a lot of speculation about why you're into Waipounamu rather than Waitangi. Whatever the reasons, personal, political or providential, your presence adds to the significance of our commemorations today, and I want to acknowledge that.
Ngāti Whātua had another view.
I'm more disappointed in the fact that Ngāi Tahu allowed the invite to go ahead, meaning that Ngāi Tahu also is implicated in the fact that they are being used by this Prime Minister to not be at Waitangi.
Ngāi Tahu dismissing the criticism, happy to have...
I mean, it's for shots like this, right? That's why he went down there. And that's why I think there is a degree of responsibility with Kaitahu. You know, they made this opportunity available for Luxon to get away from the drama of Waitangi, to get away from, you know, facing the music. And if he was here at Waitangi, you know, he'd probably have David Seymour around him. There'd probably be a lot of bodyguards. There wouldn't be the opportunities like this for these happy photo moments. And like this kid here, right? I mean, do they even know who this guy is, or have they just been told that he's like, you know, an important politician kind of thing? So I agree with the chair of the runanga of Kaitahu that it is ultimately on Luxon. Luxon made the call to be there. We can't just blame Kaitahu, but you know, for me, Kaitahu is they're a post-treaty settlement iwi. They have been given some opportunities. They're very business savvy, quite affluent on average down there compared to us up here in Ngāpuhi. And so to take that energy away from Ngāpuhi, to take that opportunity away from us to express how we are feeling to the Prime Minister, I do find to be a little problematic. But I do agree, you know, kei a rātou te rangatiratanga, it's up to them, and ultimately it's on the Prime Minister. And, you know, another thing is that Jerry Brownlee was present with Luxon. Jerry Brownlee was also at the political porphyry, the most important part that people were wanting Luxon to attend. So he really has no excuse for not being able to do both. I mean, you know, our country is not that big, right? I'm not that keen on using domestic flights so willy-nilly like that, but considering who he is and the circumstances, he's got no excuse for not coming to Waitangi.
Absolutely, and I do agree with that comment there. I do think both news outlets try to amplify this divide between the iwi and try to pit the two iwi against each other. They both reported on it. They highlighted this. And we actually think that's part of the whole strategy. They were trying to, and this is the way in which inadvertently Ngaitahu Runanga may have been implicated, as Nada Glavish said, because I think that they wanted all along to paint this image of Kaitahu, of civility, and contrast it against Ngāpuhi, whom they knew was going to protest and something was going to go down. And I noticed Cindy Kiro, who's our Governor General, in her speech at Ngaitahu, she said,
the C word.
Thank you for the civil reception or civil welcome. But she referred to their welcome as civil. Again, this feels like they're contrasting it to Ngāpuhi, who they're saying is uncivilized. So I completely agree. The media, and I think Luxon as well, the government deliberately wanted to contrast these two situations.
It's you know, there's been talk about taking funding away from Shane Jones made the threat of taking funding away from the Waitangi Trust. And without that funding, they would struggle to run the Waitangi events as they currently are. And what it feels like is, you know, more pressure being added to Ngāpuhi to settle. Ngāpuhi being, by population, the biggest iwi in Aotearoa, the biggest iwi who hasn't taken a form of settlement yet. I think we're going to be seeing it more and more. You know, oh, look at Ngāpuhi and what they're unable to do. Look at Ngāpuhi and the state of their existence. And from my perspective, the state of our current existence and the state of poverty that we're in is because of lack of social investment, lack of opportunities for our people up here in the north. And that takes us back to the early days of colonization. Kororareka being our first capital and most of the trade routes being based around Kororareka. And one of the first things that Governor Gray did, I believe, was change the trading routes and sent everything to Tamaki instead. And that was the first start, I guess, of the types of lack of opportunities that our people now find themselves in because of political decisions that were made by the government. And so now they tease us. They tease us for the position that we find ourselves in, and they highlight Kaitahu as being a picture of success because of their settlement.
Which Luxon did a bit of that in his speech, right? He highlighted how good the settlement has been.
Absolutely.
And we know that they've been pushing Ngāpuhi to settle. We, for example, little anecdote, we went to a freshwater hui a couple of years ago, and we were extremely surprised to find that there was this Pākehā man who stood up and started telling all the Māori in the room, telling them off for not settling. And he was all like, if you guys want better water infrastructure, you need to settle on. If you want this, you need to settle on. That was the time that for me as a person who's new to the space, I realized they're putting their people everywhere, trying to get into Ngāpuhi's head and convince them to settle. Now, I'm not making an argument either way of whether it's good or bad. I'm just saying that the government wants Ngāpuhi to settle, and we believe that this whole theatre that they played was actually potentially part of putting pressure on Ngāpuhi to settle.
And in terms of settling, whether no matter where you sit on if Ngāpuhi should settle or not, additional pressure coming from the government is the last thing that whole thing needs. So the kāwana, in terms of settlements, keep your opinions to yourself. And going back to comments that Shane Jones has made in terms of threatening to pull funding from the Waitangi Trust.
Yeah.
It's part of a broader plan, we believe, throwing out all of our theories, that we believe to depoliticize Waitangi Day.
Well, I mean, he more or less admits this. So after the Waitangi thing happened and Ngāpuhi challenged the government, Shane Jones came out and he was like, we're threatened to blackmail the Waitangi Trust, threatened to remove funding. As a response, he was like, oh no, look how horrible they were. You know what? We're going to cut their funding. But this article, written before Waitangi this year, right before, like the day before, and they're republishing this article from Newsroom. Shane Jones tells them that he wants a reset of Waitangi Day.
That's the word I needed.
And this is before Waitangi, before he's seen anything happen, before they were barking or whatever shit he pulled out his ass. He was saying to the media he wants a reset of Waitangi Day. And he said that he wants it to, he said he envisioned different events at different sites across the country featuring activities key to New Zealand identity.
Identity, yeah.
Like sport and music. Okay, so firstly, he already, before Waitangi, had all these plans. He wanted to move it to sites across the country. The importance of that, of course, is that Waitangi, being in Waitangi, harks back to the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. It is a reminder about Te Tiriti, it is a reminder about colonisation, and it is a reminder about the fight for tino rangatiratanga. I believe they want to shift it away from the physical place of Waitangi because they want to separate it from that history of colonisation. And we know that that's what colonisers do. That's always their objective, to erase the historical context. And so what better way to do that than remove Waitangi from the centre, place where Te Tiriti was signed, and then to make it about New Zealand activity like sport and music. So in other words, he wants to colonise the Waitangi events, depoliticize, and to de-link them from the history of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And look in that article. They figured this out themselves. In the next line, somewhat akin to that idea, Prime Minister Chris Luxon will not attend Waitangi this year. So even this article implies that Luxon went to a different place in order to warm us up to this idea that Waitangi will no longer take place in the physical location of Waitangi.
Oof. Interesting stuff. All right. One other thing, just harking back to Luxon's trip to Kaitahu. John Minto and his Palestine group down there, they were protesting. And this is just an example of how the media lies. So they said multiple people were arrested from the protest that was run by John Minto's group. They also said that John Minto himself was arrested, and they said that John Minto and his crew ignored pleas for peace by mana whenua and interrupted Luxon's speech in Aotearoa. I mean, the interruption is true, but ignored pleas for peace by mana whenua. Now, John Minto complained about this because from what he says, none of that was true. And so then you go to look into the article, and they have apologized. They have changed that part of the article. And so, it's just, they just lie. The outright lies of the media, and the fact that we have to chase them up on these things is just, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, so John Minto wasn't arrested.
No. Just the one. If people remember William Alexander, the man who decided to go on a hunger strike for Palestine, he was the one who interrupted Christopher Luxon's speech. And I say good job to our Pākehā allies who are getting out there and protesting staunchly, bravely. Things are dire at the moment, and they're pushing Māori up against every wall, and they are forcing us to react. They are forcing us to activate. They're forcing our hand. And so it's, if things keep going on the current trajectory that they are, it will mostly be Māori who are the ones lashing out. And that's when all of the racist narratives come out. That's when all the racist talking points, and probably things like abolishing various things for Māori, because look at how ungrateful we are and how bad we are and lashing out. So we really need our allies, non-Māori, to be upping the ante.
Yeah.
Please.
And the news also lied about the fact that there was a disagreement between Mana Whenua and the protest group. From John Minto's post, you can see that whatever Mana Whenua said, the group did listen, they did respect. And there was communication between them the whole time. But I believe the media wants, and this government, the state, they want us to butt heads with each other in terms of tangata tiriti and tangata Māori. They don't want us coming together. So it suits them, this narrative that the Palestine protesters are against Mana Whenua.
Exactly.
And just one point on the previous story that we talked about, just to add to that, I think that they were always intending on demonizing Waitangi events, no matter what happened. And I think it's because it's part of that strategy that they want to actually defund or depoliticize Waitangi. Because all of the media running up to Waitangi, they were like, we're expecting fireworks, we're expecting drama, we're expecting protests. And Shane Jones, he was in that article beforehand saying, oh, I think people should calm down and not do anything too outrageous. So I think that all along they were preempting something to happen at Waitangi, and no matter what happened, they were going to say it was uncivilized. Like, literally all that happened is a bunch of wahine toa turned their backs to the government. And then Aotearoa Edwards removing the mic from Seymour after he was saying extremely racist, harmful stuff. That's hardly violent.
Oh, man. And yeah.
Great
corridor, but I'll just add, that's the one thing that people have brought up that they have an issue with, is the moving of that mic. And I've said that I think all of this happening is a great sign of Ngāpuhi being united, right? But people will say, oh, but what about that kaumātua who returned the microphone after Aotearoa? And I will just say that's just that old school manaakitanga coming out. My understanding is that everyone was on the same page in terms of what was happening, but because the Manuhiri side, David Seymour Ma, ignored all of the signs, the tikanga, the backs being turned, the singing of whakarongo e noho, all of those things were ignored, and so Aotearoa decided to step things up from there. It wasn't something that was discussed, apparently, and so the kaumātua, he just had to extend that branch of manaakitanga, which I think is a beautiful thing. I don't see it as a chink in the armor or, a severe disagreement or any misalignment. I just think it is just that normal beauty that we see from Māori in terms of wanting to manaaki their guests. So all in all, we should probably wrap this up.
Ka pai.
2 hours is better than 3 hours, eh? So
a slight improvement, whānau.
So concluding thoughts on Waitangi. Do you want to start? Oh, maybe I'll start. Concluding thoughts on Waitangi. I've already said it a million times, but just that I think the future is bright for Ngāpuhi. Not just seeing our kaumātua, our pakeke and rangatira stepping up in the way that they have, but also just our rangatahi, that kohanga generation, the forum tent discussions, I think leveled up from our last Waitangi. So I'm very much looking forward to going to the next Waitangi. I'm looking at the resolutions and whatnot that Annette Sykes has put together, and I'm hoping to make some ground And I can't wait to see the progress that everyone brings to the next Waitangi Day. And I highly recommend that everyone else comes. If you have not been to Waitangi, please come. You will enjoy it. Make a Northland summer vacation out of it. You know, we have a beautiful place up here, and there's many things to do. So please come and be part of the kōrero, be part of the peaceful revolution, because that's what it's going to be. We are gearing up. We are arming ourselves with ideas and kōrero that is going to propel us into the future in a way that we can build a society that benefits everyone, because it's going to be embedded with values rather than, you know, being about corporations, which is the way that I see most other, you know, that's where a lot of others are leading. But if we can have our new future embedded with the values that we've all been talking about from the forum tent, I think we're really going to have an amazing future. So no mai, hara mai, highly recommend. Samah, ending whakaaro.
On Waitangi, well, I just wanted to note that, you know, you remember a couple of years ago, Stuff came out with Our Truth, and they were like, oh, we're so sorry for our historical racism. And yet they continue to portray Māori as uncivilized. They continue to center David Seymour and other colonizers in the kōrero. They continue to deliberately erase the voices of Māori, like those wahine who explained why they turned their backs around. Instead, they allow the colonizers' narrative to dominate the discussion day in, day out, putting mics in David Seymour's face, day in, day out, following Shane Jones around, and never, ever, ever giving an equal opportunity for Māori to properly articulate the issues. And so what we have is a whole nation that's only hearing one side of the story for hundreds of years, and we're having to go on overdrive as underfunded media, independent media, to give voices to the Māori activists and their allies from all sorts of different backgrounds. And yeah, just circle back to the fact that there was, you know, 3 days of non-stop discussion in the forum tent. Not a single second of that put in any of the news about Waitangi. Nothing at all. None of the other speeches at the pōwhiri, other than David Seymour's, and I think a couple of words of someone else shouting, was included. Nothing at all. None of Apirahama's speech that he gave at the pōwhiri.
That's why we included so much in that clip that we did show, because nothing from the media showed anything from his speech.
So yeah, it's a decision.
Actually, I will say, te karere, whakata Māori, the Māori news providers, they did.
He ririke.
So, he ririke, tino ririke. So obviously we're mainly targeting this criticism at One News, 3 News. Exactly.
Yeah, the Pākehā News, they haven't learned anything. They're still being as sexist, as racist as ever. And, well, I'm going to say sexist as well, because they're enabling the ACT Party's harassment and sexual abuse within the ACT Party and the Young ACT by not calling them out on it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and I will add to the kōrero about sexual harassment and abuse, because a lot of the survivors said this. This is an issue across politics in general. And I will add across our whole society. In almost every space that I've been in, I have seen this issue of sexual abuse and harassment and mistreatment of women exist. Absolutely. But as the survivors also note, it was especially bad within the ACT Party circles because of the racism and the sexism, because of the right-wing ideology, which is in fact just a general belief system of superiority above others who are put in the inferior category, and women are placed in that category, and Indigenous people are placed in that category, animals and the environment are placed in that category. And that's why you're going to see people in the ACT Party, that's why you're going to see fans of David Seymour on his meme pages saying horrifically white supremacist, toxic, sexist things and harassing women, because it's all part of the same culture. And unfortunately, none of this is being interrogated by our media.
Kōrero. Yep, couldn't have said it better myself. I think that's a great time to end the stream. I'll just say another thank you to everyone in the comment section, everyone who's been watching along with us tonight. Thank you all so much. And we'll just give a little plug. I hate to do this, right? But in our banner, you can see the support us, which will send you to our Ko-fi link. If you want to give a donation, we'd really appreciate it. We are completely independent, funded completely by generous people giving us donations. We don't have any perks for people who make donations. Maybe we should create some perks, but essentially you give what you want to show your appreciation. And it keeps us fed. It pays for the whare that we're living in. It pays for us to keep our lights on. Well, we're on solar power, but I mean, hey, you know, you pay for everything that you're seeing us do. So we do hope to grow the stream. We hope to bring in volunteers as well.
If you want to help with moderating comments, please send us a message.
Yeah, and we'd like to have like an expert panel of people. If you think that you are clued up on a particular topic, then, you know, flick us a message and maybe we'll have you on the show to share your whakaaro with the audience.
And someone asked when we'll be back. We're planning on doing 6 p.m. Fridays.
Planning.
So this was out of the ordinary because we went to Waitangi and it was just too hard to prepare everything for yesterday. But we're going to try and be back on Friday at 6 p.m. every Friday.
We need to do it, eh? It's the consistency of a consistent time and place, because it would be great if we could, if people just knew that we were on at a particular time. So we're going to try our best, but aroha mai during these teething periods as we learn the ropes of streaming. But again, e mihi ana kia koutou.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here, and hopefully see you on Friday. And what are we going to be talking about on Friday?
Well, we'll see what comes up in the week, but I definitely want to talk about the media's coverage of Palestine and especially the so-called ceasefire deal, because it's been bad. I'm going to say it's among the worst in the world, New Zealand media, when it comes to Palestine. So I want to do a bit of that.
Maybe we'll have to do a special midweek report on something, because I mean, there's just so many things that we want to talk about, and new things just keep piling up, and it makes it so difficult to be able to produce stuff. But
yeah, we really want to talk about these new issues New Zealand is having with the Cook Islands, and the way that Samoa is having to go ask China for help to clean up the mess that we created with that ship that sunk off their coast. So there's so much to say on that, and how we mistreat our Pacifica brothers and sisters and siblings, and that's something that hopefully we'll touch on soon.
Ka pai.
But ka pai.
Pō Māori e hoa ma. Have a good night. Thanks again, and we'll see you Friday, 6 p.m.